He rushed forward to humiliate her about being a single mother struggling for attention, but went speechless when 3 little girls helped their mother into her personal helicopter while she casually mentioned buying her 3rd one last week. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The crystal champagne flutes clinked melodically as Alicia Johnson arranged them on silver trays, her slender fingers working with practiced precision. 23 years old, with warm brown skin and intelligent eyes, she stood out among the catering staff at the Manhattan Charity Gala. Not that most of the attendees would notice someone like her. She smoothed down her mandatory black uniform, mentally calculating how many hours of pay this evening would contribute toward next semester's textbooks at Columbia. From across the opulent ballroom, Marcus Blackwood watched her. Heir to the Blackwood Investments empire and recently appointed CEO, at 32 he commanded both respect and fear in Wall Street circles. His tailored Armani suit cost more than Alicia's entire semester's tuition. He observed her quick, efficient movements with the analytical eye of someone accustomed to assessing value. "Excuse me," he said, approaching her during a momentary lull. "Could I trouble you for a glass of the Cristal?" Alicia looked up, momentarily startled by his direct address. Most guests simply took what they wanted without acknowledgement. "Of course, sir," she replied, offering him a flute. Instead of moving on, Marcus lingered. "You don't seem like the typical catering staff," he observed, his voice carrying the polished tones of old money and Ivy League education. "Perhaps because I'm not," Alicia replied with a hint of challenge. "This is just helping me pay for Columbia." A spark of interest flickered in his cool blue eyes. "Columbia? Impressive. What are you studying?" "Computer science and economics. Double major." The conversation continued longer than it should have, with Marcus asking increasingly personal questions that Alicia answered with growing confidence. What she couldn't see was how he assessed her responses like investment opportunities, calculating potential returns against acceptable risks. "You know," he said finally, "I'd be interested in continuing this conversation somewhere less crowded. Perhaps coffee sometime?" 3 days later, they met at a small cafe in Chelsea, far from Marcus's usual haunts in the Upper East Side. Over cappuccinos, he impressed her with his knowledge of emerging markets and technological innovations. He listened to her ideas with apparent interest, occasionally touching her hand when making a point. "You have a unique perspective," he told her, his eyes holding hers. "Refreshing, after the predictable thinking I encounter daily." By their 3rd meeting, Alicia found herself drawn to more than his mind. His practiced charm worked its magic, making her feel seen in a way she rarely experienced in New York's indifferent crowds. When he kissed her that evening, she didn't resist. Their relationship developed in a pattern that Alicia, blinded by affection, failed to recognize as calculated. They always met in neighborhoods where Marcus wouldn't encounter colleagues or friends. The expensive gifts he gave her, a delicate gold bracelet, designer dresses he happened to pick up, came with subtle instructions about when to wear them, always in private. "I want to keep this special," he explained when she asked about meeting his friends. "Just us, without society's expectations and judgments." 2 years passed in this pattern. Alicia graduated with honors, but the competitive job market proved challenging. Marcus discouraged her from accepting several entry-level positions. "They're beneath your talents," he insisted. "Wait for something worthy of you." His financial support meant she could afford to wait, though it created a dependency she occasionally found unsettling. Still, when she looked at him across his sprawling Upper East Side apartment, she imagined a future together, perhaps not immediately, but eventually. Then, on a crisp December morning, the plastic pregnancy test in her tiny rented bathroom displayed 2 pink lines. Alicia's emotions cycled rapidly between terror and tentative joy. Unplanned? Yes, but perhaps this was their path forward. After 2 years, surely their relationship had substance beyond secretive dates and nights in his apartment. She spent hours imagining Marcus's reaction, rehearsing how she would tell him. The following evening, she stood nervously in her bathroom, applying makeup with extra care. She wore the blue dress he had given her for her birthday, the one he said matched her remarkable eyes. In a small bakery box sat a cupcake with a tiny blue candle, a whimsical touch for her announcement. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "He loves you. He'll be surprised, but he'll adjust." Marcus's doorman gave her the same slightly disdainful nod he always did when she visited, not quite acknowledging her as someone who belonged in this building. The private elevator carried her to the penthouse floor, its quiet hum doing nothing to calm her racing heart. "There you are," Marcus greeted her with a distracted kiss. "I've ordered dinner from that Italian place you like." "Perfect," she replied, setting the bakery box on his marble countertop. "But first, I have something for you." His phone rang before she could continue. "1 second," he said, answering immediately. Blackwood speaking. The call dragged on for 15 minutes, something about a potential merger that required his attention. Alicia waited patiently, rehearsing her words again. When he finally finished, she took a deep breath. "Marcus, I have news. Something important." He looked at her expectantly, his expression neutral. "We're going to have a baby," she said, opening the bakery box to reveal the cupcake with its tiny blue candle. "I'm pregnant." The transformation that came over Marcus's face would haunt Alicia for years afterward. His features hardened into a mask of cold calculation, all warmth vanishing instantly. He stared at her as if she had suddenly revealed herself to be a different species entirely. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. "No, I found out yesterday. I'm about 6 weeks along," she explained, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. "I know it's unexpected, but unexpected?" He laughed, a sharp sound entirely devoid of humor. "It's impossible. This cannot happen." He walked to the bar cart and poured himself a generous measure of whiskey, not offering her anything. The deliberate movement gave Alicia the first inkling that something was catastrophically wrong. "Marcus, I understand it's a shock. Do you have any idea what's happening at my company right now?" he interrupted, his back to her as he stared out at the Manhattan skyline. "We're negotiating the largest merger in our firm's history. The board is watching my every move. The last thing I need is personal complications." The way he said personal complications made her stomach clench. "A baby isn't a complication, Marcus. It's—" "Let me be perfectly clear," he cut in, turning to face her with glacial eyes. "There will be no baby, no announcements, no connections between us going forward." Alicia felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that this arrangement has reached its natural conclusion," he replied, sipping his whiskey. "It was enjoyable while it lasted." "Arrangement?" she echoed, her voice barely audible. "Is that what the last 2 years have been to you?" Marcus's expression shifted to something almost like pity. "Alicia, you're an intelligent woman. Surely you didn't imagine this was heading toward marriage and happily ever after? Someone like you and someone like me?" "Someone like me?" The words felt like individual blows. "You never passed for anything more than a temporary distraction," he continued, refilling his glass. "A black girl from the Bronx will never have a place in the circles where I need to be. Did you really think this was serious?" He laughed again, the sound cutting through her like glass. Before she could respond, the elevator chimed, and 2 men in suits entered the apartment. "Ah, perfect timing," Marcus said. "These gentlemen will help you gather your things." "My things?" Alicia repeated, still struggling to process what was happening. "Whatever you've left here," Marcus clarified, already turning his attention to his phone. "They'll see you out." "Marcus," she pleaded, tears beginning to form. "We need to talk about this, about the baby." There is no we anymore, he stated flatly. And as for that situation, I'll have my lawyer contact you with paperwork. You'll be compensated for any medical expenses if you make the sensible decision. His meaning was unmistakable. You don't have refinement, connections, or value beyond your body, he continued, his words clinically cruel. A mixed-race child would be a permanent stain on the Blackwood legacy. Alicia stood frozen, unable to comprehend how the man she thought she knew could speak these words. The assistants began efficiently collecting her few belongings, a toothbrush, a pair of earrings, a book she'd been reading. I'm getting engaged next month, Marcus added, scrolling through emails as if discussing the weather. Madison Spencer. Her family owns half of Manhattan's commercial real estate. The announcement goes public next week. Another reason this situation needs immediate resolution. 20 minutes later, Alicia found herself standing on the icy sidewalk outside his building, two hastily packed bags at her feet and tears freezing on her cheeks. The December wind cut through her dress. The blue one he'd said matched her eyes, as she watched the doorman deliberately turn away from her distress. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone to call a taxi, realizing with crushing clarity how thoroughly Marcus had isolated her over the past 2 years. Her friends had gradually drifted away as she made herself constantly available for his unpredictable schedule. Her family in the Bronx barely heard from her anymore. Having always insisted on paying for everything, Marcus had also ensured she saved almost nothing from her scholarship stipends. 2 years of a relationship that she thought was building toward something meaningful had left her with less than when she started. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Alicia placed her hand protectively over her stomach. "We'll be okay," she whispered, though her voice broke on the last word. "We don't need him." As the December snow began falling more heavily, the yellow cab disappeared into the Manhattan traffic, carrying Alicia away from the life she thought she had been building. While the taxi drove through the freezing night, she couldn't possibly imagine that 15 years later, she would be returning to Manhattan in her own private jet, with a technology empire valued at billions of dollars and 3 extraordinary daughters who would make Marcus Blackwood beg for a chance to know them. The yellow cab pulled away from the curb, carrying Alicia through streets that seemed suddenly foreign and hostile. Snow fell harder now, Manhattan's glittering skyline blurring behind a veil of white. Her hand remained protectively over her still flat stomach, a gesture that would become habitual in the months to come. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked, his eyes briefly meeting hers in the rearview mirror. Alicia hesitated. Her tiny shared apartment near Columbia had been subletted months ago. Marcus had insisted she spend most nights at his place. Friends she'd neglected for 2 years couldn't be imposed upon without explanation. Her parents' cramped apartment in the Bronx was already overcrowded with her younger siblings. "Brooklyn," she finally said, remembering a rental listing she'd glimpsed online. Flatbush Avenue. The building was even more decrepit in person than in the photos, a narrow brownstone with peeling paint and security bars on the windows. The basement apartment advertisement had promised cozy efficiency at a price just within reach of her meager savings. The landlord, Mr. Rodriguez, eyed her suspiciously as she stood in the cramped hallway, still wearing the blue dress now wrinkled from her tears, snowflakes melting in her hair. "First and last month's rent, plus security deposit," he said gruffly. "No exceptions." Alicia calculated quickly. The total would leave her with less than $200 until she found work. "Please," she said, her voice barely steady. "I can pay the first month and half the security deposit now. I'll pay the rest within 2 weeks." Mr. Rodriguez began to shake his head, then paused, truly looking at her for the first time. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You in trouble, miss?" Alicia straightened her shoulders, summoning dignity from somewhere deep inside. "No, sir. Just a change in circumstances." He studied her a moment longer, then sighed. "My daughter's your age." He reached for the keys hanging on a hook by the door. "I couldn't sleep knowing I left you on the street. First month plus half security. 2 weeks for the rest." The apartment was a single room with a kitchenette in one corner, a shower stall and toilet barely concealed by a thin curtain, and a mattress on the floor. A small window at sidewalk level let in the glow of streetlights, illuminating walls with peeling paint and water stains. "It's not much," Mr. Rodriguez said apologetically. "It's perfect," Alicia replied, the exhaustion in her voice belying her words. "Thank you." After he left, Alicia sank onto the bare mattress, still in her coat, and finally allowed herself to break down completely. Sobs racked her body as the full reality of her situation crashed over her. 2 years of her life given to a man who had been playing a game all along. The cruelty of his dismissal. The child growing inside her. "What am I going to do?" she whispered into the empty room, her words disappearing into the hum of the ancient radiator. 3 days later, Alicia sat in a clinic waiting room surrounded by other women with varying expressions of worry, resignation, or determination. She had spent $73, nearly half her remaining money, on a waitressing uniform and first aid certification for a job she'd start the following week. "Alicia Johnson?" a nurse called. The examination room was cold, the paper gown thin against her skin. The technician applied gel to her stomach, the ultrasound wand pressing uncomfortably. The technician said, adjusting knobs on the machine. "That's interesting." "Is something wrong?" Alicia asked, immediate fear gripping her. "Not wrong," the technician replied, moving the wand again. "Let me just call the doctor in." The minutes waiting alone were excruciating. When the doctor finally entered, her expression was neutral but kind. "Ms. Johnson, I'm Dr. Chen. Looking at your ultrasound, I'm detecting multiple heartbeats." "Multiple?" Alicia echoed, uncomprehending. "You're carrying triplets," Dr. Chen said gently. "I can see 3 distinct fetuses, each with their own heartbeat." The room seemed to tilt. "Triplets? Are you sure?" Dr. Chen turned the monitor. "Here, here, and here," she pointed. 3 babies. That night, Alicia sat cross-legged on her mattress, eating instant ramen, the cheapest food she could find, while scrolling through her phone. The doctor's words still echoed in her ears. Triplets. 3 babies. Alone. A notification popped up, a social media alert from an account she rarely checked anymore. Without thinking, she tapped it, then froze at the image that filled her screen. Marcus Blackwood, champagne glass raised, arm around a tall blonde woman whose diamond ring caught the light spectacularly. The caption read, "Finally found someone worthy of the Blackwood legacy. Engaged. Perfect match." Madison Spencer looked exactly as a future Mrs. Blackwood should. Polished, aristocratic, white. The woman whose family owned half of Manhattan's commercial real estate. The woman he'd been planning to marry even while sharing Alicia's bed. The ramen turned to ash in her mouth. She closed the app, set her bowl aside, and placed both hands on her stomach. "It's just us now," she whispered to her unborn children. "But we'll be enough." The following months were an exercise in endurance. Alicia worked as a receptionist at a small accounting firm from 8 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, changed uniforms in public restrooms, then served tables at a diner until 9 at night. After returning to her basement apartment, she would do freelance data entry until her eyes burned, sometimes falling asleep with her laptop still open beside her. 4 hours of sleep became a luxury. Her feet and ankles swelled so badly she could barely fit into her shoes. Morning sickness plagued her well into the 5th month, forcing her to keep crackers in her pockets at all times. Mr. Rodriguez, true to his word, had given her 2 weeks to pay the remaining security deposit. When she handed him the money, earned through extra shifts and skipped meals, he nodded approvingly. "You're a fighter," he said. "That's good." By her 6th month, Alicia's pregnancy was impossible to hide. The manager at the accounting firm called her into his office one morning, his expression uncomfortable. "Alicia, you've been reliable," he began, not meeting her eyes. but our clients have certain expectations about our front desk presentation. I'm still capable of doing my job, she replied, one hand resting on her prominent belly. It's not about capability, he said, sliding an envelope across the desk. It's about image. Your final check is inside. We're letting you go. That night, Alicia sat on the edge of her mattress, staring at a small velvet box she'd kept hidden at the bottom of her suitcase. Inside was the only thing of real value she owned, a diamond ring her grandmother had given her before passing away. For when you graduate college, Grandma had said, a reminder that Johnson women always finish what they start. Alicia had graduated, and now she needed rent money more than sentiment. The pawn shop owner barely glanced at her swollen belly as he examined the ring. I can give you $800, he said flatly. It's worth at least $3,000, Alicia protested, having researched its value online. The man shrugged. Take it or leave it. $800 meant 2 months' rent and prenatal vitamins. It meant not being homeless while carrying triplets. It meant survival. I'll take it, she whispered. One particularly difficult afternoon in her 7th month, Alicia was making her way to her second job. The August heat was oppressive, the subway car packed and airless. She'd already worked 6 hours at the diner, her back screaming in protest, feet so swollen she'd abandoned her work shoes for flip-flops. As the train lurched between stations, black spots danced before her eyes. She tried to reach for a pole to steady herself, but her fingers closed on empty air. The last thing she heard was a woman's concerned voice saying, "Make room! She's pregnant!" She came to on a worn leather couch, a cool cloth on her forehead. Blinking in confusion, Alicia realized she was in what appeared to be the back room of a bookstore. Shelves lined the walls, and the smell of old paper filled the air. "Welcome back," said an elderly woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun. "You gave us quite a scare." "Where am I?" Alicia asked, struggling to sit up. "My bookshop. Goldstein's Books in Brooklyn Heights. I'm Esther Goldstein." The woman helped Alicia into a sitting position. "You fainted on the subway. Luckily, I was in the same car and recognized someone who needed help." As Alicia's vision cleared, she noticed the walls were covered with framed diplomas and photographs. Esther shaking hands with business leaders and politicians, Esther behind lecterns at prestigious universities. "You were a professor?" Alicia asked, noticing a Harvard diploma. Esther smiled. "Economics at Harvard for 30 years before opening this bookstore, and I recognize determination when I see it." She handed Alicia a cup of tea. "Now tell me why a young woman carrying triplets is working herself to the point of collapse." Something about Esther's direct yet kind manner broke through Alicia's carefully maintained composure. Before she knew it, she was telling this stranger everything. Marcus, the abandonment, her desperate struggle to survive. Esther listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly concerned. When Alicia finished, the older woman sat quietly for a moment. "I have a proposition for you," she finally said. "I need someone intelligent to help me digitize this business, someone who understands both technology and economics. And you need stability." "I can't accept charity," Alicia began. "It's not charity," Esther interrupted firmly. "It's an investment in potential. There's a small apartment above the shop that's been sitting empty since my nephew moved west. The job comes with flexible hours and health insurance. In return, you'll help bring this 19th century business into the 21st. 2 months later, Alicia was in the delivery room, the contractions coming fast and hard. The triplets were arriving 6 weeks early, setting off a flurry of activity among the medical team. "I need you to push now, Alicia," the doctor instructed. There was no one beside her to hold her hand, no one to wipe her brow or whisper encouragement. She gripped the rails of the bed, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. Ava came first, tiny and fierce, a cry erupting from her lungs despite her small size. Zoe followed 7 minutes later, slightly larger but quieter. Maya arrived last, blinking solemnly at the bright lights of the delivery room. The next morning, Alicia lay exhausted in her hospital bed, watching her daughters in their incubators. So small, so fragile, yet already fighters. The door opened, and Esther entered carrying a gift bag. "I brought something for them," she said, pulling out 3 identical teddy bears, each with a different colored ribbon. Every child should have their own. As Esther settled into the chair beside the bed, Alicia felt tears threatening. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "Because 30 years ago, I was a young woman with ambition but no connections, no family money, no clear path forward," Esther replied simply. "Someone took a chance on me. This is how we change the world, one person at a time." 1 week later, Alicia brought her daughters home to the small apartment above the bookstore. Esther had somehow acquired 3 second-hand bassinets, arranging them in the living room where Alicia could keep watch through the night. After feeding and changing them, Alicia sat on the floor between the bassinets, watching her 3 daughters sleep. Their tiny faces, so similar yet distinct, were peaceful in slumber. "He said we didn't have value," she whispered to them, her voice gathering strength with each word. "We're going to show the world exactly how wrong he was." In her moment of deepest despair, Alicia couldn't possibly imagine that the small software program she would begin coding during late-night feedings would become the seed of a technological revolution that would one day be studied at Harvard, the very university where Esther had taught. The subway rocked gently as Alicia drifted in and out of consciousness, the world around her growing dim. The August heat pressed down like a weighted blanket, making each breath a struggle. Her swollen belly seemed to tighten, a warning sign she was too exhausted to heed. The sea of indifferent faces blurred as her knees buckled. "Make room! She's pregnant!" a firm voice commanded, cutting through the fog in Alicia's mind just before darkness claimed her completely. When she opened her eyes, the harsh fluorescent lights of the subway car had been replaced by the warm glow of a vintage lamp. She lay on a worn leather couch, the rich scent of old books filling her nostrils. A cool cloth rested on her forehead, and for one disorienting moment, she wondered if the past 7 months had been merely a nightmare. "There you are," said a voice that managed to be both authoritative and gentle. "I was beginning to think we should call an ambulance." Alicia struggled to focus on the speaker. An elderly woman with intelligent eyes and silver hair pulled into an immaculate bun. Despite her obvious age, she carried herself with the straight-backed posture of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Where am I?" Alicia asked, her throat dry. "My bookshop, Goldstein's Books in Brooklyn Heights." The woman helped Alicia into a sitting position with surprising strength. "I'm Esther Goldstein. You fainted on the subway, and since I was in the same car, I couldn't very well leave you there, could I? Especially not in your condition." As her vision cleared, Alicia took in her surroundings. She was in what appeared to be a back office, though office seemed too sterile a word for the cozy space lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Between the books, the walls were decorated with framed diplomas and photographs, dozens of them showing the woman before her in various impressive settings. One photo caught Alicia's eye. Esther shaking hands with a former president, both of them standing on what was unmistakably the Harvard campus. "You were a professor?" Alicia asked, noticing a Harvard diploma prominently displayed. Esther smiled, revealing laugh lines that spoke of a life well lived. "Economics at Harvard for 30 years before opening this bookstore, and I recognize determination when I see it." She handed Alicia a cup of tea. "Now, tell me why a young woman carrying triplets is working herself to the point of collapse." Something about the direct question, delivered without judgment but with genuine concern, broke through the walls Alicia had carefully constructed around herself. Before she could stop them, words began pouring out about Marcus, the brutal abandonment, the desperate scramble for survival, the dwindling funds, the loss of her receptionist job, pawning her grandmother's ring, the punishing schedule of multiple jobs. Esther listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. When Alicia finally fell silent, the older woman sat quietly for a moment, as if weighing a decision. "How far along are you?" she finally asked. 31 weeks, Alicia replied, resting her hand on her belly where one of the babies was kicking vigorously. "The doctor says they could come any day now." "And where will you take them? That basement apartment you mentioned?" Alicia nodded, shame coloring her cheeks. "It's all I can afford." Esther stood suddenly, pacing the small office with her hands clasped behind her back, the stance of a lecturer considering a complex problem. "I have a proposition for you," she said, turning to face Alicia with an expression that brooked no argument. "I need someone intelligent to help me digitize this business. Someone who understands both technology and economics, and you need stability." "I can't accept charity," Alicia began, her pride, one of the few things Marcus hadn't managed to strip from her, rising instinctively. "Charity?" Esther scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "My dear, I didn't spend 3 decades at Harvard teaching the brightest minds in America to engage in charity. I'm talking about an investment in potential." She moved to her desk, pulling out a ring of keys. "There's a small apartment above the shop that's been sitting empty since my nephew moved west. The job comes with flexible hours and health insurance. In return, you'll help bring this 19th century business into the 21st. Alicia blinked, certain she must still be suffering from the effects of her fainting spell. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Esther replied simply. "I know you're intelligent. Columbia doesn't give scholarships to fools. I know you're hardworking. 3 jobs while carrying triplets proves that. And I know you have integrity. You could have taken the easy way out, but you chose the harder path." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "When I was 23, a professor saw potential in me that others missed because I was a woman and Jewish in a field dominated by Christian men. He gave me an opportunity that changed my life. I'm not offering you charity, Alicia. I'm offering you the same chance I was given." 2 weeks later, Alicia had moved into the small but clean apartment above Goldstein's books. The space was modest: 1 bedroom, a living area with a kitchenette, and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub, but compared to the basement room, it felt like a palace. Esther had insisted on helping her set up a simple nursery area, complete with a second-hand rocking chair. Working in the bookstore proved to be exactly what Alicia needed. The pace was manageable, the environment peaceful, and Esther's steady presence provided both mentorship and comfort. They spent hours discussing how to modernize the store's inventory system, with Esther appreciating Alicia's technical knowledge while sharing decades of business wisdom. For the first time in months, Alicia slept without the gnawing fear of homelessness or starvation. But as her due date approached, a different anxiety took hold: the reality of facing childbirth and new motherhood completely alone. The contractions started at 3 in the morning, 6 weeks before her due date. Alicia woke to a sharp pain and dampness between her legs. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to breathe and reach for her phone. "Esther," she gasped when the older woman answered. "I think the babies are coming." "I'll be right up," came the immediate response. The taxi ride to the hospital was a blur of increasing pain and Esther's calm instructions to breathe. At the hospital, everything accelerated. The urgent voices of nurses, the doctor's concerned face, the words premature and NICU floating above her like ominous clouds. In the delivery room, Alicia gripped the bed rails, her body racked with pain unlike anything she'd ever experienced. There was no hand to hold, no partner to encourage her, no family member to witness the arrival of new life. "I need you to push now, Alicia," the doctor instructed, her voice firm but kind. Drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, Alicia pushed. The first baby arrived with a cry that seemed impossibly strong for such a tiny being. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up the infant briefly before passing her to a waiting NICU team. 7 minutes later, after more intense pushing, the second baby emerged. Another girl, the doctor said, and again a specialized team whisked the newborn away. The third birth came the hardest, with Alicia feeling she had nothing left to give. But with a final, Herculean effort, she brought her last daughter into the world. In the aftermath, lying exhausted in the recovery room, Alicia couldn't even hold her babies. They were too small, too fragile, needing the support of incubators and monitors. She could only look at them through the clear plastic, 3 tiny humans with translucent skin and miniature features, each one hooked to machines that beeped reassuringly, confirming they lived. She slept fitfully that night, waking frequently with the instinct to check on her daughters, only to remember they weren't beside her. The hospital room felt cavernous and empty, a stark reminder of how alone she truly was. The next morning, the door to her room opened, revealing Esther carrying a gift bag. The sight of the older woman, someone who had no obligation to care but chose to anyway, brought tears to Alicia's eyes. "I brought something for them," Esther said, pulling out 3 identical teddy bears, each with a different colored ribbon, red, blue, and purple. Every child should have their own. As Esther settled into the chair beside the bed, Alicia felt the tears she'd been holding back begin to fall freely. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "Because 30 years ago I was a young woman with ambition but no connections, no family money, no clear path forward," Esther replied simply. "Someone took a chance on me. This is how we change the world, one person at a time." The NICU nurses allowed Alicia to choose names for the hospital bracelets. She had thought about this moment often during her pregnancy, but now, seeing her daughters, the names seemed to choose themselves. "Ava," she said for the firstborn, the name of her grandmother who had given her the ring she'd been forced to pawn. "Zoe," for the second, a name that meant life in Greek, appropriate for a child who had fought so hard to enter the world. And Maya, for the third and smallest, a name that meant water in some cultures but also illusion or dream in others, a reminder that what seemed impossible could become reality. For a week, Alicia divided her time between resting in her hospital room and sitting beside the incubators in the NICU, talking softly to her daughters, telling them stories about the future she imagined for them. Nurses taught her how to change diapers that seemed impossibly small, how to feed babies who could take only milliliters at a time, how to read the monitors that tracked their vital signs. Esther visited daily, sometimes bringing books to read aloud to the infants, sometimes just sitting quietly beside Alicia, a reassuring presence in a sterile, frightening environment. Finally, the day came when all 3 girls were deemed strong enough to go home. They were still tiny, none weighing more than 5 pounds, but their lungs were functioning properly and they were taking formula consistently. The nursery area in Alicia's apartment had been transformed. Somehow Esther had acquired 3 second-hand bassinets, arranging them in the living room where Alicia could keep watch through the night. There were stacks of newborn diapers, tiny clothes, formula, and bottles, everything 3 new babies would need. "How did you manage all this?" Alicia asked, overwhelmed by the generosity. "I have friends," Esther said simply, "and everyone loves to help babies." That first night at home was a baptism by fire. Despite their size, the triplets had healthy lungs and distinct personalities already asserting themselves. Ava, the firstborn, was demanding and vocal. Zoe was calmer but persistent. Maya observed everything with an intensity that seemed beyond her newborn capabilities. After the third feeding of the night, Alicia sat on the floor between the bassinets, watching her 3 daughters sleep. Their tiny faces, so similar yet distinct, were peaceful in slumber. In that moment, exhausted beyond belief but filled with a fierce protective love, Alicia made a promise. "He said we didn't have value," she whispered to them, her voice gathering strength with each word. "We're going to show the world exactly how wrong he was." In her moment of deepest despair, Alicia couldn't possibly imagine that the small software program she would begin coding during late-night feedings would become the seed of a technological revolution that would one day be studied at Harvard, the very university where Esther had taught. The promise Alicia whispered to her 3 sleeping daughters became her North Star in the chaotic months that followed. 3 years passed in a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and stolen moments of study. The apartment above Goldstein's books transformed from a temporary haven into a true home, with walls now decorated with finger paintings and milestone photographs, first smiles, first steps, first words. At 3 in the morning, while the triplets slept soundly in their converted bedroom, Alicia sat cross-legged on her bed, the blue light of her laptop illuminating her exhausted face. She had developed a routine that allowed her to function on minimal sleep, working in the bookstore during the day with the girls playing nearby, studying programming during the precious hours when all 3 happened to nap simultaneously, and dedicating the quiet hours of night to more intensive learning. Her fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard as she completed another online tutorial on database management. Despite her exhaustion, her mind remained sharp, absorbing complex concepts and immediately considering practical applications. On the screen beside the tutorial, she had opened a document filled with ideas for improving the bookstore's outdated systems. Just one more module, she whispered to herself, fighting against heavy eyelids. The soft ping of an incoming email distracted her momentarily. It was from Esther, sent at this ungodly hour. The woman seemed to require as little sleep as Alicia. Found this Harvard Business Review article on small business digitization. Thought of you. E. Alicia smiled. Esther's mentorship had evolved from practical assistance to intellectual partnership. The older woman had connections everywhere and used them strategically to further Alicia's education, sending articles, arranging virtual meetings with former colleagues, and constantly challenging her to think bigger. When the triplets woke at 6, Alicia had managed barely 2 hours of sleep, but adrenaline and purpose carried her through the morning routine of breakfast, cleanup, and getting everyone dressed. By 8, she had the girls settled in their corner of the bookstore, where a colorful rug and shelves of children's books kept them happily occupied while she worked. Inventory Day, Esther announced, emerging from the back office with a thick ledger book. Still the most tedious day of the month. Alicia looked at the ancient leather-bound volume with its handwritten entries, then at the stack of purchase orders and sales receipts waiting to be reconciled. A familiar frustration bubbled up as she contemplated the hours of inefficient work ahead. "There has to be a better way to do this," she said, not for the first time. "We're losing sales because we can't track what's in stock properly. Last week we turned away 3 customers looking for that new bestseller because we thought we were out, then found copies misfiled yesterday." Esther sighed, adjusting her reading glasses. "I've been doing it this way for 20 years. My father did it this way for 40 before that. And in those 60 years, computers were invented," Alicia pointed out gently. Esther looked up, studying Alicia's face with the penetrating gaze that had likely intimidated generations of Harvard students. "You have that look again." "What look?" "The look of someone who's about to change something I've been comfortably doing wrong for decades." Esther closed the ledger deliberately. "You have an idea. Tell me." Alicia took a deep breath. "I think I could build a custom inventory system for the store. Something simple but effective. Track stock levels, automate reordering, analyze sales patterns to predict demand. I've been learning database architecture and user interface design in my courses and—" "You want to use my bookstore as your laboratory?" Esther interrupted, one eyebrow raised. Alicia hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "I just thought, it's about time." Esther's stern expression melted into a smile. "I've been waiting for you to suggest it. Watching you struggle with my archaic systems has been painful. Make it happen, Alicia. Show me what you can do." Over the next 3 months, Alicia's life took on a new intensity. During the day, she continued working in the store, jotting notes about pain points and inefficiencies. Each night, after tucking the girls into bed with stories and kisses, she would transform into a coding machine, building the system module by module. There were moments of triumph, when the database finally connected properly to the front-end interface, when the barcode scanner successfully pulled up book information with a simple swipe. There were also moments of despair, like when a glitch erased 2 weeks of test data, or when she realized her initial architecture couldn't scale as she'd hoped. Through it all, the triplets continued growing, developing distinct personalities that amazed Alicia daily. Ava, always the first to attempt anything new, had recently discovered a fascination with the store's calculator, pressing buttons methodically and studying the resulting numbers with unusual focus for a 3-year-old. Zoe had become the unofficial greeter of the bookstore, charming customers with her precocious conversation. Maya was the quietest, often found sitting alone with picture books, turning pages carefully and studying illustrations with intense concentration. One evening, while Alicia was testing the inventory system's search function, she felt a small presence at her elbow. Ava had climbed onto the chair beside her, watching the screen with interest. "What's that, Mommy?" she asked, pointing to the lines of code. "It's called programming, sweetie. I'm telling the computer what to do." "Like when you tell us to pick up toys?" Alicia smiled. "Something like that, but the computer always listens the first time." Ava nodded solemnly. "Can I help?" Rather than dismissing her, Alicia pulled her daughter onto her lap. "Sure. Press this button when I tell you to, okay?" She guided Ava's small finger to the enter key, letting her help with the testing. It was a small moment, but one that would prove prophetic in ways Alicia couldn't yet imagine. Finally, after countless revisions and late nights, the system was ready for implementation. Esther closed the store for a full day as they entered the entire inventory into the database, scanning books and inputting publisher information. When they reopened, the ancient cash register had been replaced with a computer terminal, and the handwritten sales ledger was officially retired. The effects were immediate and dramatic. Books that had been lost in the stacks were discovered and displayed prominently. Popular titles were automatically reordered when stock ran low. Sales increased as customers could now be told exactly when expected shipments would arrive rather than the vague "we can order it" promises of before. "You've revolutionized my little store," Esther commented one afternoon, watching a line of customers being efficiently served by the new system. "Do you realize what you've created here has applications beyond just Goldstein's books?" Alicia looked up from where she was helping Maya sound out words in a picture book. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Esther said, her eyes twinkling with that familiar look of seeing potential others missed, "that every small business in Brooklyn faces the same inventory challenges we did. Jacob at the cafe down the street was just complaining about his supply management nightmare last week." The idea took root slowly. Alicia was focused on the bookstore and raising her daughters. The notion of expanding her creation hadn't occurred to her. But once Esther planted the seed, it grew steadily in her mind. A month later, Alicia found herself sitting in Brooklyn Beans, the cafe Esther had mentioned, demonstrating her software to the owner, a bearded man named Jacob, who looked increasingly impressed as she walked him through each feature. "This could save me hours every week," he said, scratching his beard thoughtfully. "And you're saying you built this yourself? For the bookstore?" Alicia nodded, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. This was the first time she'd presented her work to anyone other than Esther. "I'd be willing to adapt it for your specific needs," she offered. "Coffee beans instead of books, inventory expiration dates, that sort of thing." Jacob grinned. "When can you start?" Implementing the system at Brooklyn Beans presented new challenges and opportunities for improvement. Each adaptation made the software more flexible, more powerful. Word began to spread among local business owners. There was a young woman in Brooklyn who could solve inventory problems that had plagued them for years. Meanwhile, the triplets continued to flourish. At their annual pediatric checkup, the doctor raised her eyebrows at their developmental assessments. "These scores are remarkable for 3-year-olds," she commented, reviewing the results, "particularly in cognitive and verbal skills. Are they in any special programs?" "No," Alicia replied, "just lots of books and conversation." Later that week, a customer at the bookstore, a woman who identified herself as an elementary school teacher, approached Alicia after watching Ava arrange books by color, Zoe organize other children into a story circle, and Maya intently study a children's encyclopedia about space. "Your daughters are extraordinary," the woman said quietly. "I've been teaching for 20 years, and I rarely see this level of focus and ability in children so young. Have you considered programs for gifted children? They might need more stimulation than typical preschools provide." The observation both filled Alicia with pride and added another item to her growing list of concerns. Special programs cost money, money she was still carefully budgeting despite her improved circumstances. One evening, while installing her system at Brooklyn Beans after hours, Alicia explained her newest challenge to Jacob as she configured the coffee inventory categories. 3 gifted kids and limited resources," she sighed. "I want to give them every opportunity, but the programs the teacher recommended are expensive." Jacob nodded sympathetically, then said, "You know, I have a friend you should meet. Alan retired from the tech industry a few years back, made a fortune with some software company in the 90s. He comes in every morning for his espresso. Smart guy, always talking about missing the innovation game. I bet he'd be interested in what you've built here." The following morning, Alicia met Alan Reynolds, a sharp-eyed man in his 60s who listened attentively as she demonstrated the cafe's new inventory system on Jacob's tablet. When she finished, he asked questions that revealed a deep understanding of both technology and business, questions that pushed her to articulate aspects of her design she'd implemented intuitively. "This has real commercial potential," he said finally, stirring his espresso thoughtfully. "You've solved a common problem with an elegant, accessible solution. Have you thought about turning this into a business?" Alicia blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the question. "I've been focused on making it work for individual clients." "But it could be much more," Alan insisted. "With some refinement and proper marketing, this could be scaled to serve thousands of small businesses. They're an underserved market, too small for the enterprise solutions, too complex for simple spreadsheets." He pulled out a business card, writing a number on the back. $10,000 for 15% of your idea, plus, more importantly, my guidance to transform it into a viable business. Think about it. 2 days later, Alicia sat at her kitchen table with the business card in hand, the triplets playing nearby with blocks and picture books. Esther sat across from her, a cup of tea steaming between her hands. "What do you think?" Alicia asked. "Am I crazy to even consider this?" Esther took a measured sip before answering. "I think you'd be crazy not to. This is exactly the opportunity you've been working toward, whether you realized it or not." "But I have no business experience, no connections." "You have me," Esther interrupted. "And now you have Alan. Sometimes success isn't about what you know, but who believes in what you could know." Alicia looked at her daughters, Ava methodically stacking blocks by size, Zoe creating an elaborate story with stuffed animals, Maya already showing signs of reading by matching word cards to objects. They deserved every chance, every opportunity life could offer. The next day she called Alan and accepted his offer. As she signed her first investment contract at the kitchen table with Esther as witness and the triplets playing contentedly nearby, Alicia couldn't possibly imagine that in just 7 years she would be declining a $100 million acquisition offer from the very company where Marcus still struggled to maintain his relevance. As Alicia's signature dried on the investment contract, a new chapter began. 5 years passed with the momentum of a freight train, transforming both her life and her business with breathtaking speed. Onyx Software, named by Alicia to represent strength born from pressure, had evolved from a simple inventory management system into a comprehensive platform serving hundreds of small and medium businesses across the East Coast. The modest Brooklyn office space that housed Onyx's operations buzzed with energy on a crisp autumn morning. Alicia navigated between desks where her team of 5 developers worked, their workspace clearly too small for the growing operation. Empty coffee cups and takeout containers testified to late nights and looming deadlines. "We need to upgrade the processing capacity for Client Sync before the Hartman pitch tomorrow," Alicia said, leaning over Derek's monitor. The young programmer nodded, fingers already flying across his keyboard. "On it, boss," he replied, the respect in his voice genuine. Everyone at Onyx knew Alicia's story, how she'd built the company's core technology while raising Triplets alone, how she'd refused to compromise on quality even when funds were tight. Alicia checked her watch, almost 3 o'clock. The girls would be finishing school soon. At 8 years old, they attended a specialized program for gifted children that Alicia could now comfortably afford. The monthly tuition payments, once a source of anxiety, had become a point of pride, tangible proof of her ability to provide opportunities she'd once only dreamed of. Her phone vibrated with a text from the school's aftercare program, confirming the girls would be brought to the office by 4. Another modern miracle of her new life, reliable childcare and the flexibility to integrate motherhood with her career on her own terms. The afternoon meeting with potential client Horizon Manufacturing loomed large in her mind. Their contract would be Onyx's biggest yet, a stepping stone toward the expansion they desperately needed. At precisely 3:30, Alicia welcomed Horizon's representatives into their cramped conference room, really just a corner of the main office with a partition. Richard Harmon, Horizon's operations director, frowned slightly as he surveyed the modest surroundings. "Impressive growth numbers," he acknowledged, flipping through the proposal she'd prepared. "But I must be candid, Ms. Johnson. I have some concerns about Onyx's capacity to handle an account of our size." Alicia maintained her professional smile. "What specific concerns, Mr. Harmon?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Well, frankly, your company is quite small, and your personal situation—" His eyes darted to the children's drawings pinned to her cubicle wall. "I'm not certain a single mother can devote the necessary attention to a client like Horizon." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Alicia felt her team tense around her, aware of the insult but following her lead. She took a measured breath, remembering Esther's advice. Sometimes the greatest power comes from not reacting as expected. "That's an interesting perspective, Mr. Harmon," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "As a mother of triplets and CEO, I manage limited resources with maximum efficiency. Exactly what your software should do. In fact, I'd argue my experience gives Onyx a unique advantage." She stood, projecting confidence she'd cultivated through countless challenging moments. "Our system reduced inventory costs for Meridian Manufacturing by 38% in 6 months. They have twice your volume. Would you like to speak with their CFO about my attention to detail?" The meeting ended with tentative interest rather than commitment, but Alicia counted it as a victory. She'd held her ground without compromising her dignity. As the Horizon team left, Alicia turned to find her team watching her with admiration. "That was masterful," said Elena, her operations manager. "I would have told him where to stick his concerns." Alicia smiled. "Then we wouldn't have a chance at their business. Sometimes you have to redirect prejudice rather than confront it." The office door burst open as 3 identical girls with corkscrew curls and bright eyes tumbled in, backpacks bouncing. Despite their matching features, they couldn't have been more different in demeanor. Ava methodical and focused, Zoe vibrant and commanding, Maya thoughtful and observant. "Mom, I got an A+ on my math test," Ava announced, waving a paper covered in complex equations that seemed impossible for an 8-year-old. "Mrs. Peterson said my speech about ocean conservation was the best in class," Zoe added, already organizing the snacks Elena had prepared for all the children. Maya simply offered a book she'd been reading, a middle school level text on astronomy with several pages carefully marked. "I have questions about black holes," she said seriously. The cramped office transformed instantly as the energy of the children filled the space. The other employees' children began arriving as well, a policy Alicia had implemented after the Horizon meeting last year. If her identity as a mother was going to be used against her, she would instead make it a cornerstone of Onyx's culture. The corner of the office had been converted into a small but welcoming children's area with desks for homework, comfortable beanbags for reading, and art supplies. Alicia watched as Ava settled near the developers, quietly observing their work with fascination. Zoe immediately took charge of organizing the younger children into a game, her natural leadership emerging. Maya curled up with her book, occasionally making notes in a small journal. "I need 20 minutes to finish this code review," Alicia told the girls. "Then we'll go over homework." Late that evening, after the girls had been tucked into bed in their apartment, now a spacious 3-bedroom in a better neighborhood, Alicia sat at her desk, staring at spreadsheets that refused to balance. Despite Horizon's potential interest, the company's cash flow remained precarious. They needed the expansion to survive, but required capital for the expansion. "The classic business paradox," she muttered, running calculations for the 10th time. Unless something changed, they wouldn't make next month's payroll without dipping into her personal savings. Again. Her phone rang unexpectedly. The caller ID showed a San Francisco area code she didn't recognize. "Alicia Johnson speaking," she answered cautiously. "Ms. Johnson, this is Victoria Chen from Redwood Ventures. I hope I'm not calling too late." Alicia straightened. Redwood was a prominent venture capital firm specializing in tech startups. "Not at all. How can I help you?" "I was at a conference last week where your client, Artisan Breweries, presented their supply chain transformation. Your software was mentioned prominently. I've been doing some research since then on both your technology and your company culture. Both interest me greatly." Alicia's heart pounded. "I appreciate that. We're quite proud of both." "I'll be direct," Victoria continued. "Redwood is looking to diversify our portfolio with female-founded tech companies that show strong fundamentals and innovative approaches. We're particularly interested in businesses that have proven concepts but need capital to scale. Does that describe Onyx?" The conversation lasted over an hour, with Victoria asking pointed questions about growth metrics, client retention, and technical architecture. By the end, she had scheduled a formal pitch meeting for Onyx to present to Redwood's investment committee, the first step toward a potential Series A funding round. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Alicia practically lived in the office, refining financial projections and polishing her presentation. At home, she practiced in front of the bathroom mirror while the girls timed her with a stopwatch, offering surprisingly insightful feedback. "You need to smile more when you talk about the growth numbers," advised Zoe, always attentive to emotional presentation. "The technical slide stays on screen too long," Ava noted, mathematically precise as always. "Why don't you tell them about how you built this while taking care of us?" asked Maya thoughtfully. "That's the most impressive part." The day of the pitch arrived with crystal clarity. Standing before Redwood's investment committee in their sleek San Francisco offices, Alicia felt a strange calm. This moment, presenting to a room of Silicon Valley power players, should have been intimidating. Instead, she felt a surreal confidence. After raising Triplets alone while building a company from nothing, what could possibly frighten her? Her presentation flowed seamlessly. Onyx's origin, growth trajectory, client success stories, and vision for expansion. When she finished, the questions came rapid fire, but Alicia fielded each one with composure born from countless late nights anticipating every possible angle. 2 weeks later, Alicia gathered her team in their cramped Brooklyn office. "I have an announcement," she said, trying to contain her excitement. "Redwood Ventures has approved our Series A funding, $5 million at a $20 million valuation." The cheers that erupted drowned out anything else she might have said. Hugs and tears followed as the reality sank in. Their sacrifices and hard work had been validated. They could afford the larger office space they desperately needed, hire the additional developers on their wish list, and expand their marketing beyond word of mouth. The celebration continued that evening with champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for the children in plastic cups. In the new chaos of excitement, Alicia slipped away to her desk, opening her laptop to check something that had been nagging at her all day. The business news site loaded quickly, confirming what she'd glimpsed earlier: Blackwood Investments under investigation for questionable practices. The photograph showed Marcus looking tense and defensive outside a government building, his once confident posture now hunched against the scrutiny of reporters. Alicia didn't feel the vindication she might have expected. Instead, a profound sense of disconnection washed over her. The man in that photo, the one whose rejection had once shattered her world, seemed like a character from a book she'd read long ago rather than a real person who had shaped her life so dramatically. She closed the laptop gently, returning to the celebration, to the family and community she'd built from the ashes of his rejection. As she watched her daughters laughing with the children of her employees, Alicia felt something settle within her. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that Marcus's cruelty had ultimately given her the freedom to become something far greater than she might have been in his shadow. While closing her laptop, satisfied to see that the empire of Marcus had begun to show cracks, Alicia couldn't predict that in just 3 years her revolutionary machine learning technology would attract attention not just from Wall Street, but from Silicon Valley, catapulting Onyx to a market valuation that would make Blackwood Investments look like a mid-sized company. The light from the towering glass headquarters of Onyx Innovations cast a blue glow across the San Francisco skyline. 3 years had transformed the company from a promising startup into a technological powerhouse. Inside her expansive corner office, Alicia watched the sunset paint the bay in brilliant orange and gold. The framed cover of Forbes magazine on her wall, featuring her as tech's rising star, caught the fading light, a testament to how far she'd come. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. "The board approved the new AI research division," her assistant announced. "Budget allocation starts next quarter." Alicia nodded, satisfaction warming her chest. The machine learning algorithms her team had developed had revolutionized inventory management across 3 industries, generating the exponential growth that venture capitalists dream about. What had begun as a simple solution for a bookstore had evolved into a technological ecosystem that was changing how businesses operated worldwide. Her phone chimed with a calendar reminder: Girls' Science Fair, 7 p.m. Even with her crushing schedule, Alicia never missed her daughter's events. At 12 years old, the triplets had blossomed into remarkable young women, each brilliant in her own way. The private elevator whisked her to the underground parking garage where her driver waited. Technology had given her luxuries she once couldn't have imagined, but her greatest achievement sat in the back seat of her car each morning. 3 girls with matching corkscrew curls and determined eyes carrying backpacks filled with advanced textbooks and innovative ideas. "Mom!" Ava called out when Alicia arrived at the prestigious academy the girls attended. "The judges want to see you." Alicia followed her daughter through crowds of parents and students to a project display where Zoe and Maya stood beside an intricate model of what appeared to be a water filtration system. "Ms. Johnson," the lead judge said, extending his hand, "your daughter's project is extraordinary. They've designed a low-cost water purification system that could be implemented in developing regions without access to complex infrastructure." Alicia beamed with pride as the girls explained their invention, Ava handling the mathematical models, Zoe discussing community implementation strategies, and Maya detailing the scientific principles. Their poise and intelligence drew a crowd of impressed onlookers. Later that evening, as they celebrated the girls' first-place victory with ice cream sundaes, Ava set down her spoon with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Mom," she began, exchanging glances with her sisters, "can we ask you something important?" Alicia recognized the serious tone immediately. "Of course, sweetheart. Anything." "Who is our father?" The question hung in the air, crystalline and unavoidable. Alicia had been preparing for this moment for years, yet it still felt like stepping off a cliff. The girls had asked simpler versions of this question when they were younger, but Alicia had always provided age-appropriate, limited answers. At 12, they deserved more of the truth. "Let's talk about this at home," she said quietly. The ride back to their Pacific Heights home was unusually silent. The triplets exchanged meaningful glances. Their ability to communicate without words had always fascinated Alicia. Inside their spacious living room, with its panoramic views of the Golden Gate Bridge, the four of them gathered on the oversized sectional sofa that had hosted countless movie nights and heart-to-heart conversations. Alicia took a deep breath, closing her laptop that displayed the latest company financials. "I've always known this conversation would come eventually." Three identical pairs of eyes, so like her own, watched her intently. "Your father is a businessman in New York named Marcus Blackwood," she began, her voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath. "We were together for 2 years. When I told him I was pregnant, he decided he didn't want to be part of our lives." "He didn't want us?" Zoe asked, the most emotionally attuned of the three, her voice small despite her usual confidence. Alicia reached for her daughter's hand. "He didn't know you well enough to understand what he was losing, and that's his loss, not ours." "Did he ever try to find us? To see what we were like?" Maya asked, her analytical mind already processing the implications. "No," Alicia answered honestly. "He made his choice, and he's never reached out." "Blackwood?" Ava repeated, her eyes widening in recognition. "As in Blackwood Investments? We studied that company last semester in economics club. They've been struggling since that scandal with pension funds." Alicia nodded, unsurprised by her daughter's knowledge. "Yes, that's his company." "Why are you telling us now?" Maya asked, always direct. "Because you're old enough to understand the complexities of the situation," Alicia explained. "And because you deserve to know your history, even the painful parts." Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Alicia found herself standing in the doorway of their shared study space. Despite having individual bedrooms, the triplets had insisted on a communal area for their projects and homework. Their differences complemented each other. Ava's mathematical precision, Zoe's leadership and social consciousness, Maya's scientific curiosity. On Ava's desk sat her tablet, still logged into a financial news site with an article about Blackwood Investments. The girls had been researching their biological father, just as Alicia knew they would. She didn't interfere. Their curiosity was natural, and she had always encouraged them to seek answers independently. The following weekend, Alicia noticed the triplets huddled around Maya's computer, whispering intensely. They quickly switched screens when she entered the room. "Everything okay?" she asked casually. "Just working on a project," Zoe answered, a little too quickly. Later, Alicia discovered browser history showing social media searches for Marcus Blackwood. They had found pictures of him with Madison at charity galas, vacation photos on private yachts, snippets of his life displayed for public consumption. She wondered what they thought, seeing this stranger who shared their DNA living a life that had never included them. Weeks passed, and the questions continued, becoming more specific and thoughtful. The girls processed the information in their own ways, Ava researching Blackwood Investments' financial history, Zoe exploring the psychological impact of absent fathers, Maya creating a genetic trait comparison chart. Their resilience amazed Alicia. They approached their biological father's rejection as a puzzle to solve rather than a wound to nurse. Meanwhile, Onyx Innovations continued its meteoric rise. The company's move to its gleaming San Francisco headquarters had coincided with the launch of its groundbreaking machine learning platform that could predict inventory needs with unprecedented accuracy. Wall Street analysts, who had once dismissed Alicia as a niche player, now scrambled to understand how her company had leapfrogged established competitors. One afternoon, following a particularly successful quarterly earnings call, Alicia's assistant interrupted her executive meeting. "I'm sorry, Ms. Johnson, but there's an urgent call from Ava's school." Alicia's heart raced as she excused herself. School calls during the day usually meant trouble. "Ms. Johnson," the principal began, "there's been an incident. Ava was found accessing restricted financial databases during computer lab. When questioned, she claimed she was researching her father's company for a personal project." Alicia closed her eyes briefly. "I'll be right there." At the school, she found Ava sitting stoically outside the principal's office. "I didn't do anything wrong," Ava stated before Alicia could speak. "Those databases are public information. I just used advanced search parameters." "Which you know is against school policy without permission," Alicia replied, keeping her voice even. In the principal's office, Alicia listened as he explained the situation. Ava had used sophisticated techniques to access financial records that, while technically public, required specialized knowledge to retrieve. She was specifically researching Blackwood Investments' decline over the past 5 years, he added, clearly curious but professional enough not to ask the obvious question. After appropriate apologies and promises that Ava would write a reflection essay on digital ethics, they were free to go. In the car, Alicia waited for her daughter to explain. "I wanted to understand what happened to his company," Ava finally said. "The public reports don't show everything. He's lost 63% of market value since that pension investigation. I was trying to see if the decline started before or after we were born." The directness of her daughter's curiosity stunned Alicia. "And what did you discover?" "It started 5 years ago, 7 years after he abandoned us. So it wasn't because of us," Ava concluded matter-of-factly. "It was because of bad investment strategies and ethical shortcuts." That evening, Alicia called a family meeting. The triplets sat cross-legged on the living room floor, their postures identical despite their different personalities. "I understand you're curious about Marcus," she began. "That's natural and healthy. But I need you to pursue that curiosity appropriately and ethically." "We just want to know who he is," Maya explained. "Half our DNA comes from him." "And we want to understand why he didn't want us," Zoe added, the hurt evident in her voice despite her attempt to sound casual. "His decision had nothing to do with you as individuals," Alicia emphasized. "He rejected the idea of being a father before he ever knew how extraordinary you would become." The conversation continued late into the night, with more honesty than ever before. Alicia shared details she had previously withheld, how Marcus had called her a temporary distraction, how he'd claimed a black girl from the Bronx would never fit into his world, how he'd suggested a mixed-race child would stain the Blackwood legacy. The girls' expressions hardened as they heard the full cruelty of his rejection. What had been an abstract absence in their lives now had the sharp edges of deliberate abandonment. 2 days later, Alicia received a call from a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Johnson, this is Robert Keller from Business Insider. We're planning a cover story on Onyx Innovation's remarkable growth trajectory. We'd like to feature you as our next cover profile." Alicia hesitated, immediately cautious. Media coverage of her company was one thing, but personal profiles inevitably led to questions about her background. "I appreciate the interest, Mr. Keller. However, I prefer to keep the focus on Onyx's technology and business strategy, not my personal life." "With all due respect, Ms. Johnson, your personal journey from single mother to tech CEO is extraordinarily inspiring. Our readers would—" "My life story isn't what built Onyx's machine learning algorithms," Alicia interrupted firmly. "Our technical innovations and business model did that." The reporter persisted. "Your story of overcoming obstacles is compelling. From raising triplets alone in Brooklyn to building a multi-billion-dollar company, people need to know how you did it." The conversation ended with Alicia reluctantly agreeing to consider the proposal. That night, she discussed it with the girls, who surprised her with their enthusiasm. "You should do it, Mom," Zoe insisted. "Your story could inspire other women facing similar challenges. Just make sure they focus on your technological innovations, too," Ava added pragmatically. Maya, ever the most contemplative, asked the question Alicia had been avoiding. "If you do this interview, will people find out about our father? Will he see it?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Alicia realized that any significant media profile would inevitably lead back to Marcus Blackwood. The world of high finance and tech entrepreneurship was too interconnected for such connections to remain buried forever. "Possibly," she answered honestly. "Is that something that concerns you?" The triplets exchanged their characteristic glances, seeming to communicate silently before Zoe spoke for all of them. "We're not ashamed of our story, Mom. We're proud of what you've built, what we've built together." While considering whether to accept the interview that could expose her story to the world, Alicia didn't imagine that in just 3 years she would be face-to-face with Marcus Blackwood at New York's most exclusive event, with 3 extraordinary young women at her side as silent witnesses to the greatest mistake he had ever made. While considering whether to accept the interview that could expose her story to the world, Alicia couldn't have anticipated how rapidly everything would change. 3 years passed like a whirlwind, each month bringing new growth, new challenges, and new triumphs. The morning sun glinted off the glass and steel structure of Onyx Tower, a 60-story architectural marvel dominating the Silicon Valley skyline. The company logo, a sleek black gemstone, crowned the building, visible for miles around. Inside the penthouse office suite, Alicia Johnson stood before floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city come alive beneath her. Fourth-quarter projections exceed targets by 17%, she noted, scrolling through reports on her tablet. $12 billion in market valuation, 3,700 employees worldwide, 42% year-over-year growth. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed by time and triumph. At 38, Alicia radiated the quiet confidence of someone who had built something extraordinary from nothing. Her tailored Armani suit, navy blue with subtle silver threading, was a far cry from the second-hand clothes she'd once worn to job interviews. A few elegant silver strands now threaded through her natural curls, worn proudly in a style that business magazines had called unapologetically authentic. The intercom chimed softly. "The executive team is assembled for the quarterly review, Ms. Johnson. I'll be right there." The boardroom fell silent as Alicia entered. 12 executives, diverse in gender, race, and background, rose respectfully. She had built this team meticulously, seeking out talent from non-traditional sources, creating opportunities for those often overlooked by Silicon Valley's usual pipelines. "Good morning," she began, taking her seat at the head of the table. "Let's discuss the integration timeline for our new machine learning platform." Throughout the 2-hour meeting, Alicia guided discussions with clarity and vision. Male executives twice her age deferred to her expertise without hesitation, a stark contrast to the early days when she'd fought for every scrap of credibility. When the CFO presented a conservative growth strategy, she challenged his assumptions without apology. "Our innovation timeline supports more aggressive expansion," she noted. "Let's not underestimate what we're capable of achieving." As the meeting concluded, her assistant approached with a reminder. "You're 3 o'clock at the research lab with Maya. She's finalizing her bioengineering presentation for the MIT symposium." Alicia smiled, maternal pride momentarily softening her professional demeanor. "I wouldn't miss it." The research floor of Onyx Tower hummed with intellectual energy. In a glass-walled laboratory, 15-year-old Maya Johnson adjusted a microscope with the confidence of a seasoned scientist. Despite her youth, the research fellows treated her with professional respect, earned through brilliance rather than nepotism. "Mom!" Maya looked up, her face lighting with excitement. "The neural pathway modification is working. Look." Alicia peered through the microscope at what appeared to be living cells responding to electrical stimulation. Maya's project, exploring neural interfaces for prosthetic limbs, had already attracted attention from leading medical researchers. "The MIT panel will be impressed," Alicia said, squeezing her daughter's shoulder gently. If they can follow my explanation, Maya sighed, I still need to simplify the presentation for a general audience. You'll find the right balance, Alicia assured her. Where are your sisters? Ava's in the coding lab finalizing her NASA submission. Zoe's on a video call with the Education Minister of Kenya about the next school. Pride swelled in Alicia's chest. Her daughters, now 15, had blossomed into extraordinary young women, each channeling her brilliance in unique directions. Ava, always the mathematician, had developed an algorithm for mapping distant space phenomena that had caught NASA's attention. Zoe, the natural leader, had created a foundation that had already built 20 schools in underserved communities worldwide. And Maya, with her scientific mind, had become the youngest recipient of the National Science Prize at 12. In the coding lab, Alicia found Ava surrounded by monitors displaying complex mathematical models. A team of senior developers watched in barely concealed awe as her fingers flew across the keyboard, solving problems that had stumped professionals with decades of experience. The spatial mapping algorithm needs to account for gravitational anomalies, Ava explained to a gray-haired physicist who nodded earnestly. She paused when she noticed her mother. Just finishing up, Mom. NASA's expecting the final submission tomorrow. Take your time, Alicia replied. I'll meet you and your sisters for dinner at 7. Her final stop was the Foundation office, where Zoe conducted a video conference with the poise of a seasoned diplomat. On screen, officials from several African nations discussed implementation strategies for the educational technology program Zoe had designed. The solar-powered learning tablets need to be distributed before the rainy season, Zoe was explaining, and teacher training should begin immediately afterward. Watching her daughter navigate complex international negotiations with such confidence, Alicia recalled the tiny baby who had once fit in the palm of her hand. All 3 girls had been accepted into early admission programs, Ava at MIT, Zoe at Harvard, Maya at Yale, accomplishments that filled Alicia with fierce joy. That evening, dinner in their penthouse apartment overlooking the bay became a family affair, the rare night when all 4 women could share a meal without interruptions. The conversation flowed from quantum computing to humanitarian architecture to molecular biology, punctuated by laughter and sisterly teasing. As they cleared the dishes together, Alicia had always insisted on maintaining normal family responsibilities despite their wealth. A special delivery arrived. The elegant silver envelope bore the unmistakable mark of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. What's this? Maya asked as Alicia opened it. An invitation to the Met Gala, Alicia replied, scanning the heavy cardstock. They're honoring the 100 greatest American innovators. I've been included. The triplets gathered around to read over her shoulder. This is huge, Mom, Ava said. The most exclusive event in New York. I don't know, Alicia hesitated. I generally avoid these social showcases. But this isn't just social, Zoe argued, always the strategist. This is recognition of your impact. Your foundation for technological education for girls from underserved communities deserves this spotlight. Alicia placed the invitation on the counter, ambivalence evident in her expression. New York has complicated memories for me. The 3 girls exchanged meaningful glances. They had learned more about their father over the years. His company's decline, his troubled marriage to Madison Spencer, the financial scandals that had tarnished the once prestigious Blackwood name. Is it because of him? Maya asked directly. Because he might be there? Alicia considered her daughter's question, realizing that even after all these years, the thought of seeing Marcus Blackwood face to face stirred emotions she'd thought long resolved. Partially, she admitted, but also because I've built our life here, intentionally distant from that world. But that's precisely why you should go, Ava reasoned, her logical mind always finding the most direct path. Statistically speaking, in an event of that size, the chances of a meaningful interaction are minimal. And even if you did see him, Zoe added, You'd be meeting as equals. Actually, not equals. You'd be the more successful one by every metric. A smile tugged at Alicia's lips. When did you three become so wise? We had an excellent teacher, Maya replied simply. After putting the girls to bed, a tradition they maintained despite being teenagers, Alicia stood on her balcony overlooking San Francisco Bay. The invitation lay in her hands, the embossed lettering catching the moonlight. New York City, the place where she had been broken and reborn. The next morning, Alicia gathered the girls for breakfast. I've decided to accept the Met Gala invitation, she announced, and I'd like all three of you to accompany me. The triplets' excitement was immediate and vocal. Between bites of whole grain waffles, they discussed dresses, potential introductions to influential figures in their fields, and the logistics of missing 3 days of school. We'll fly out Thursday morning, Alicia explained. The event is Friday evening. We'll return Sunday. I've never been to New York, Maya mused. It's strange to think we were conceived there but have never visited. A shadow crossed Alicia's face briefly. It's a remarkable city, beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Across the country, in a significantly less impressive office, Marcus Blackwood stared at a similar silver envelope with considerably less enthusiasm. Once housed in a gleaming skyscraper, Blackwood Investments now occupied 3 floors of a midtown building, its diminished status reflected in the scaled-down accommodations. Another charity obligation, he muttered, tossing the invitation onto his cluttered desk. Just what we need. The past decade had not been kind to Marcus. At 47, his once athletic frame had softened, stress etching permanent lines around his eyes. 3 government investigations, countless legal fees, and a series of disastrous investment decisions had decimated the empire he'd inherited. The photograph on his desk, Marcus and Madison at their wedding 15 years earlier, seemed to mock him with its frozen moment of anticipated triumph. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Blackwood, the lawyers are here about the investor lawsuit." He sighed heavily, straightening his tie. "Armani, but from 3 seasons ago. Send them in." For 3 hours, Marcus endured discussions of settlement options and damage control strategies. The latest class action suit from investors claimed negligent management and misrepresentation of fund performance. Accusations that, while Marcus would never admit it publicly, weren't entirely unfounded. When the lawyers finally departed, Madison swept into his office without knocking. Despite 15 years of marriage, 3 separation attempts, and 2 publicly hushed-up infidelity scandals, she remained striking, if considerably more manufactured than she had been at 24. "The Met Gala invitation arrived," she announced, ignoring his obvious exhaustion. "We need to make a statement this year. The Carmichael wedding was a disaster. Everyone was whispering about the downgrade in our lifestyle. Madison, we're fighting for the company's survival. A gala is hardly—" "It's precisely because we're fighting that we need to appear strong," she interrupted, her voice taking on the edge he'd come to dread. "Image is everything in this world, Marcus. Or have you forgotten the lessons your father taught you?" The irony of his wife invoking his father's wisdom wasn't lost on Marcus. Blackwood Sr. had warned him repeatedly about Madison's type, beautiful, ambitious, and utterly transactional in her worldview. He'd ignored those warnings, believing he was making a strategic marriage that would solidify his social position. "Fine," he conceded, too tired to argue. "We'll attend." "Wear the new Tom Ford," Madison instructed, already focused on her phone. "And we need to coordinate our arrival time with the Whitmores. They still have social capital we can leverage." After she left, Marcus turned to the window, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline he had once felt entitled to dominate. The view, like everything else in his life, was less impressive than it had been 15 years ago. 3 days before the gala, the final attendee list circulated among New York's elite. Madison scanned it over breakfast, circling names of potential allies and underscoring those to avoid. Suddenly, she froze. "Alicia Johnson is attending," she said, her voice unnaturally controlled. "CEO of Onyx Innovations." Marcus looked up from his coffee, his expression carefully blank. And? Don't play dumb, Marcus. I know exactly who she is to you. Madison's perfectly manicured nail tapped the list. The question is, does she know who we are now? While the Blackwoods contemplated the implications of Alicia's attendance, her private jet soared eastward across the country. The luxurious cabin was configured as a mobile office with the triplets working on their respective projects while Alicia conducted video conferences with her executive team. As New York's iconic skyline appeared through the windows, Alicia felt a strange mixture of triumph and trepidation. She gazed at the approaching city, memories flooding back of that icy December night when she'd been cast out, pregnant and alone. This city broke me once, she thought, watching her brilliant daughters absorbed in their work. Now I return on my own terms. While the jet descended toward the private terminal, none of the four women could anticipate that in the next 24 hours, the Met Gala would become the stage for a confrontation that would shake Manhattan's high society and force Marcus Blackwood to face the greatest mistake of his life before everyone he had always tried to impress. The New York skyline glittered beneath them as the private jet began its descent. Alicia gazed out the window, memories washing over her like the changing tide, that cold December night when she'd stood alone on the sidewalk outside Marcus's building, pregnant and abandoned, tears freezing on her cheeks. Now she returned transformed, powerful beyond anything she could have imagined then. "Mom? Are you okay?" Maya's voice pulled her from her reverie. Alicia turned to her daughter with a reassuring smile. "Just remembering the last time I was here." The Met Gala, traditionally held on the first Monday in May, had been moved to a Friday this year to accommodate the schedules of international dignitaries being honored. The event promised to be even more exclusive than usual, with tight security and a guest list curated to represent the pinnacle of achievement across industries. As their motorcade pulled up to the Pierre Hotel, photographers snapped pictures of the sleek black vehicles, speculating about their occupants. Alicia had deliberately chosen accommodations away from the Upper East Side, unwilling to sleep in the neighborhood that held such painful memories. "The dresses have arrived," Zoe announced as they settled into their suite. 4 garment bags from Prada hung in the closet. Alicia had commissioned complimentary designs in varying shades of sapphire blue. The color choice wasn't coincidental. It was the same shade as the dress she'd worn the night Marcus had cast her out. Across town, Marcus Blackwood adjusted his bow tie in the mirror of his Fifth Avenue apartment, downsized from the penthouse he'd once owned, but still in a prestigious building he could barely afford to maintain. The reflection that stared back at him showed a man clinging to the vestiges of former glory. Gray peppered his temples and lines of stress had permanently etched themselves around his eyes. "The car will be here in 15 minutes, Madison called from the bedroom where she was being attended to by a stylist. "Don't forget the Cartier cufflinks, we need to look the part tonight." Marcus sighed, reaching for the velvet box that contained one of the few luxury items he hadn't been forced to sell. The past 5 years had been a steady decline. Government investigations, investor lawsuits, dwindling clients. The Blackwood name, once synonymous with financial acumen, now appeared in the business press alongside words like struggling and beleaguered. "Ready," Madison announced, emerging in a custom Balenciaga gown that had cost more than their monthly mortgage payment. Her blonde hair was swept into an elegant chignon, diamonds glittering at her throat, borrowed from the jeweler for the evening, though no one would know but them. The streets surrounding the Metropolitan Museum of Art teemed with limousines and security personnel. Floodlights illuminated the iconic steps where the world's elite would make their entrances. Camera flashes created a strobe-like effect as celebrities, business magnates, and political figures posed on the red carpet. Marcus and Madison Blackwood arrived precisely at 7:30, timing their entrance to coincide with several other finance industry couples. Madison smiled mechanically for the cameras, years of practice allowing her to hide the strain in her marriage behind a mask of practiced glamour. Marcus nodded at acquaintances, forcing confidence into his posture despite knowing that most of these people were aware of his company's precarious position. Blackwood Investments showing resilience despite market challenges. He overheard a financial reporter commenting, the kind of careful phrasing that masked the reality of his failing empire. The crowd's energy shifted suddenly, a palpable buzz of excitement rippling through the gathered spectators and photographers. A sleek black limousine pulled up to the curb, distinctive in its understated elegance amid the more ostentatious vehicles. "Who's that?" whispered an attendee nearby. The answer came as the chauffeur opened the door, and Alicia Johnson emerged first, commanding immediate attention in a structured sapphire blue Prada gown that seemed to capture and reflect light with every movement. Her natural curls were styled in an elegant updo, accentuated with subtle diamond pins. She stood for a moment at the bottom of the steps, radiating confidence and poise. The photographers, recognizing her immediately, called out in excitement, "Ms. Johnson, Alicia, over here!" "It's the Onyx CEO!" one exclaimed. "She never comes to these events." The real frenzy began as three identical young women emerged from the limousine in succession, each wearing a variation of the same sapphire tone in different styles that complemented their personalities. Despite being triplets, their individuality was evident. Ava's dress featured architectural elements, Zoe's incorporated flowing details suggesting movement and energy, while Maya's included subtle scientific motifs embedded in the fabric pattern. Marcus, who had been making small talk with a former client, felt his blood freeze in his veins. 15 years vanished in an instant as he recognized Alicia, not the vulnerable young woman he'd discarded, but a commanding presence whose success was evident in every aspect of her bearing. His eyes darted involuntarily to the three teenagers beside her, and something twisted painfully in his chest as he registered their features. His eyes, his jawline, his mother's distinctive profile, multiplied in triplicate. "Marcus, you look like you've seen a ghost," Madison commented, following his transfixed gaze. "Who is that woman?" Before he could formulate a response, they were ushered forward in the reception line. The precise choreography of the event meant that couples were being introduced every 45 seconds, moving up the grand staircase in a carefully timed procession. Through some cruel twist of fate, or perhaps the alphabetical proximity of Blackwood and Johnson on the guest list, Marcus and Madison reached the top of the stairs at exactly the moment Alicia and her daughters were being announced. "Mr. and Mrs. Marcus Blackwood, Blackwood Investments," the herald intoned, just as they came face to face with the four women. Ms. Alicia Johnson, CEO of Onyx Innovations, and her daughters Ava, Zoe, and Maya Johnson. Time seemed to stop as Alicia's eyes met Marcus's. Recognition, shock, and something unreadable flashed between them. The air grew thick with unspoken history. 15 years of separation collapsed into a single electric moment of awareness. "Mr. Blackwood, Ms. Johnson, could we get a photo of the two business leaders together?" called a photographer, oblivious to the tension crackling between them. The silence that followed was dense enough to be cut with a knife. Around them, other guests continued to flow into the museum, but in their small pocket of space everything had frozen in a tableau of past meeting present. Alicia was the first to recover, her lips curving into a smile that never reached her eyes. "Marcus Blackwood," she said, her voice controlled and even. "How long has it been?" Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Alicia, you look different." The inadequacy of his words hung in the air between them. "And you look exactly the same," she replied smoothly, though her assessment wasn't entirely accurate. The years had not been as kind to him as they had been to her. Madison's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched in confusion as she sensed the undercurrents but couldn't yet decipher them. "Have you two worked together before?" she asked, her social training kicking in to fill the awkward silence. "Not exactly," Alicia answered, her gaze never leaving Marcus's face. "Mr. Blackwood and I knew each other briefly, many years ago." The triplets studied Marcus with identical expressions of polite curiosity. They had seen photographs during their research, of course, but the man before them seemed diminished compared to the confident figure from those images, smaller somehow, less substantial. "These are my daughters," Alicia continued, pride evident in her voice. "Ava, who recently received funding from NASA for her spatial mapping algorithm; Zoe, whose foundation has built 20 schools in underserved communities worldwide; and Maya, who won the National Science Prize at 12. Each girl nodded politely as she was introduced, their poise remarkable for 15-year-olds. Marcus stared at them, unable to disguise his shock at the litany of accomplishments. "Shall we move inside?" Alicia suggested, breaking the spell. "I believe we're creating a bottleneck on the stairs." As they entered the museum's great hall, transformed for the evening into a fantasy of lights and flowers, the event coordinator intercepted them with clipboard in hand. "Ms. Johnson, you and your daughters are seated at table 1 with the honorary committee," she explained. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, you're at table 3, just to their right." The seating arrangement, another twist of fate or perhaps careful planning by someone who knew their history, ensured that throughout dinner, Marcus would have a clear view of Alicia and the 3 extraordinary young women who shared his DNA. The evening proceeded with the choreographed precision typical of such high-profile events. Cocktails were followed by a seated dinner, with brief speeches interspersed between courses. Marcus found himself unable to focus on conversations around him, his attention repeatedly drawn to table 1, where Alicia engaged effortlessly with world leaders and innovators while her daughters contributed to discussions with insights beyond their years. During the main course, Marcus leaned toward Alicia, taking advantage of Madison's momentary absence as she networked with former friends at adjacent tables. "You've done well for yourself," he said quietly, his tone suggesting he was bestowing a compliment from a position of superiority. "I always knew you had potential, Alicia." She turned to him slowly, one eyebrow raised in perfect arch. When she responded, her voice carried just enough to be heard clearly by everyone at both their tables. "Curious, because you explicitly said I had no value or future when you kicked me out while pregnant with your triplets, claiming I would tarnish your image on Wall Street." The sudden silence that engulfed their corner of the room was deafening. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations halted mid-sentence. At table 1, the triplets turned in perfect synchronization to stare at Marcus, comprehension dawning on their faces as they processed what they had just heard. "You are our biological father?" Maya asked, her analytical mind immediately connecting the dots. Before Marcus could respond, the master of ceremonies approached the podium, tapping the microphone to announce the Entrepreneur of the Decade award. As the spotlight swung to illuminate the stage, the name Alicia Johnson echoed through the hall, followed by mention of her company's impressive $12 billion market value. While the audience erupted in applause, Marcus Blackwood's face drained of all color, the full magnitude of what he had discarded 15 years ago finally crashing down upon him with devastating clarity. While the audience erupted in applause, Marcus Blackwood's face drained of all color, the full magnitude of what he had discarded 15 years ago finally crashing down upon him with devastating clarity. The murmurs around him grew like an incoming tide, faces turning first toward him, then toward Alicia and the triplets, then back again with widened eyes and not-so-subtle whispers. "Blackwood abandoned the Johnson woman when she was pregnant? Did you hear what she said? Triplets? He told her she'd tarnish his image on Wall Street?" Madison's fingers dug into Marcus's arm as she returned to their table, her perfectly maintained smile now brittle at the edges. "What is happening?" she hissed through clenched teeth. "Why is everyone looking at us?" On stage, Alicia accepted the Crystal Award with graceful composure, her sapphire gown catching the spotlight as she approached the microphone. The entire room fell silent, collectively holding its breath in anticipation of what might follow the bombshell that had just detonated across the elegant dining tables. "Thank you for this tremendous honor," Alicia began, her voice clear and strong. "When I founded Onyx, I believed that technology should serve humanity's highest potential, not just the privileged few, but everyone with the drive to create and contribute." She spoke for exactly 5 minutes about innovation, resilience, and creating opportunities for underrepresented groups in technology. She thanked her remarkable team, her earliest investors, and her daughters, my greatest creation and inspiration. Not once did she mention Marcus, abandonment, or their shared history. The omission was more devastating than any direct accusation could have been. As Alicia returned to her seat amid thunderous applause, the weight of judgmental stares pressed down upon Marcus from every direction. The remainder of the dinner passed in excruciating slow motion, with Madison firing questions at him in furious whispers. "Are those girls yours? Did you have some affair before we met? Why didn't you tell me about this?" Marcus fumbled through evasive half-answers, his usual smooth confidence shattered. "It was before us. Complicated situation. Not the time or place to discuss this." Across the room, the triplets maintained their poise, occasionally glancing toward Marcus with clinical curiosity, as though observing an unusual specimen through glass. Their identical features, so clearly echoing his own, now seemed like 3 mirrors reflecting back the consequences of his callousness. When the formal dinner concluded, guests migrated toward the Temple of Dender for dancing and continued networking. The crowd parted subtly around Marcus and Madison, social instinct guiding people away from the epicenter of scandal. Longtime associates suddenly found urgent conversations elsewhere. People who had courted his attention for years now avoided eye contact. Marcus made his way to the bar, ordering a double whiskey and downing it in one burning gulp. The alcohol did little to steady his nerves but provided momentary insulation against the growing horror of his situation. He ordered another, ignoring Madison's warning glance. By his 3rd drink, the initial shock had transformed into a dangerous mixture of alcohol-fueled bravado and desperation. Spotting Alicia near the temple's reflection pool, surrounded by admirers including 2 tech billionaires and a former president, Marcus felt a sudden irrational need to assert himself, to reclaim some control over a narrative that had slipped entirely from his grasp. "Marcus, don't," Madison warned, recognizing the determined set of his jaw. "You'll only make this worse." He ignored her, straightening his bow tie and forcing his posture into the commanding stance that had once intimidated boardrooms. Threading through the crowd, he approached just as the group around Alicia dispersed, leaving her momentarily alone with her daughters. "Alicia," he said, his voice slightly slurred at the edges, "we need to talk." She turned, her expression composed but distant. "I don't believe we have anything to discuss, Marcus." "Those are my daughters too," he insisted, louder than he'd intended. Several nearby conversations paused. "I have rights." A small, incredulous laugh escaped Alicia's lips, the first genuine reaction he'd elicited from her all evening. "Rights? That's an interesting concept coming from you." The triplets observed this exchange with identical expressions of cool assessment. Their synchronized scrutiny was unnerving, like being judged by a single consciousness split into 3 bodies. "You're extraordinary," Marcus said, turning to address them directly, his desperation becoming more evident. "All of you. You have the Blackwood DNA, clearly. I could introduce you to important people, open doors." "We already have doors open," Ava interrupted calmly. "In fact, we're opening doors for others." Her tone wasn't disrespectful, merely factual, which somehow made it worse. There was no anger in her assessment of him, only a cool, analytical dismissal. "I have a fortune that will one day be yours," Marcus continued, reaching for the one advantage he still believed he possessed, wealth and status that could be bequeathed. Zoe smiled politely, her expression both kind and devastating. "Our mother taught us that fortunes are built, not waited for as inheritances. We're already building our own, A small crowd had gathered at a discreet distance, pretending not to eavesdrop on the unfolding drama. Madison appeared at Marcus's elbow, her fingers digging painfully into his arm as she attempted to extract him from the scene. "Marcus, we're leaving before you completely destroy what's left of our reputation," she hissed. "Your company is failing, isn't it?" Maya asked suddenly, her head tilted slightly as she studied him with penetrating intelligence. "I read about Blackwood Investments shares dropping 68% this year. Poor investment decisions combined with outdated management approaches." Marcus froze, stunned by the precision of her assessment. "How do you—" Maya shrugged, the gesture elegant despite its casualness. "I follow the market as a hobby. Your liquidity ratios have been concerning for several quarters." The clinical accuracy of her analysis, delivered in the voice of a 15-year-old girl who shared his blood but owed him nothing, left Marcus speechless. He stood paralyzed, watching as Alicia checked her elegant watch. "Our helicopter is waiting," she said, as though discussing a routine appointment rather than a dramatic exit. "We have a video conference with Asian investors at 6 in the morning." As they began to move toward the exit, Marcus made one final desperate attempt to salvage something, anything, from the wreckage of the evening. "I can fund any project you want," he called after them, his voice cracking slightly. "I can recognize you legally. We could be a family." Alicia stopped and turned. For the first time that evening, her expression contained a trace of something softer than indifference, something almost like compassion. "Marcus, you still don't understand, do you?" she said quietly. "Your daughters don't need your name, your inheritance, or your belated recognition. They have my surname, my strength, and my determination, and that has proven more than sufficient." Her voice softened further. "We don't harbor resentment. We don't need to. Your rejection freed us to become something we never would have been under your shadow." With that, she turned away, her 3 daughters falling into step beside her. Their departure created a vacuum in the room, conversation gradually filling the space they left behind. Madison stood rigid beside Marcus, her expression murderous. "We're going home," she said flatly. "Now." The ride back to their apartment passed in glacial silence. Madison stared out the window, her profile sharp against the city lights. When they arrived, she immediately headed for the bedroom without a word, closing the door with deliberate control that was somehow worse than a slam. Marcus poured himself another drink in the darkened living room, the events of the evening playing on endless loop in his mind. He had lost everything tonight, not just his social standing, but the last illusion that he still commanded respect in the world he had once dominated. The following morning, sunlight pierced through blinds he'd forgotten to close, waking Marcus with a pounding headache. Madison was nowhere to be seen, but her absence spoke volumes. Reaching for his phone, he found it flooded with notifications, missed calls from his publicist, texts from board members, and dozens of news alerts. The first headline made him physically recoil. "Blackwood Ear Scandal, CEO abandoned mother of triplets, now tech billionaire." Another read, "From rejection to redemption, how Alicia Johnson built empire after Blackwood betrayal." His phone rang, his financial advisor calling for the 3rd time. With trembling fingers, Marcus answered. "It's bad," the advisor said without preamble. "Blackwood shares opened down 15%. Major clients are calling, threatening to pull their investments. The board is convening an emergency meeting at noon." Marcus mumbled something about calling back, ending the call as he struggled to process the magnitude of the disaster. A text message appeared from an unknown number, a photograph of Madison being escorted by a doorman, suitcases in hand, into a waiting car. 3 days later, the Wall Street Journal published a feature article headlined, "The High Price of Abandonment, How Marcus Blackwood Lost the Greatest Opportunity of His Life." The piece clinically detailed the parallel trajectories of Blackwood Investments' decline and Onyx Innovations' meteoric rise, complete with a graph showing the intersecting lines of their respective valuations. 2 weeks after the gala, Marcus sat alone in his study, reviewing the latest disastrous financial projections when his lawyer called. The board vote was unanimous, she informed him flatly. They're exercising the moral clause in your contract. You'll receive the minimum severance package. After the call ended, Marcus stared blankly at the wall for several minutes before opening his laptop. With methodical determination, he drafted a legal petition seeking visitation rights with the triplets. It was a desperate move, driven more by a sudden awareness of his legacy than by any genuine paternal instinct. But it was all he had left. 2 days later, Alicia received the thick envelope of legal documents at her San Francisco office. She glanced at the contents briefly before writing a simple note on onyx letterhead. Please handle this with maximum discretion, and passing it to her legal department. The triplets decided their response independently, drafting a formal letter that reflected their collective decision while honoring their individual perspectives. We are not interested in establishing a relationship at this time. Perhaps in the future, when we have fully processed the impact of your choices. For now, we respectfully request distance. 1 month later, as the Onyx Innovations team prepared to unveil their most revolutionary technology yet, the triplets stood proudly beside their mother on stage. The global livestream captured the moment when Alicia introduced her daughters as co-developers of the breakthrough that would transform clean energy worldwide. Marcus watched the broadcast from his significantly downsized Upper West Side apartment, alone, a stack of bankruptcy paperwork awaiting his signature on the coffee table. The empire he had feared would be tarnished by a girl from the Bronx had crumbled by his own hand, while the legacy he rejected flourished beyond any expectation. Not through vengeance or retaliation, but through the simple truth that Alicia Johnson had always been exactly what he failed to see: extraordinary. The news cycle moves quickly in New York, but some stories linger, embedding themselves into the collective consciousness of the city's elite. 2 weeks after the Met Gala, the name Blackwood had become synonymous with scandal, while Johnson represented an American success story of mythic proportions. The contrast couldn't have been more stark or more public. In her temporary office in the Onyx Innovations New York satellite location, Alicia reviewed the preliminary patents for their newest technology. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, the same skyline that had once seemed so intimidating to a pregnant woman abandoned on a cold December night. Now it spread before her like a kingdom she had conquered on her own terms. The Asian investors increased their offer by 30% after the energy prototype demonstration, her CFO reported via video conference. They were particularly impressed by the triplets' contributions to the algorithmic framework. Alicia smiled, pride warming her chest. Schedule a follow-up for next week. I want to make sure their ethics standards align with ours before we proceed. As she ended the call, her executive assistant appeared at the door. Ms. Johnson, this just arrived by courier. It's marked confidential and legal. Alicia accepted the thick manila envelope, immediately recognizing the letterhead of Granger and Associates, one of New York's most prestigious law firms. Inside was a meticulously prepared petition for visitation rights, filed by Marcus Blackwood, requesting reasonable access to his biological daughters. For a moment, Alicia simply stared at the document, 15 years of history compressed into these sterile legal paragraphs. The desperation behind them was palpable, a drowning man grasping for any lifeline. "Is everything all right?" her assistant asked, noting her expression. "Yes," Alicia replied, reaching for an onyx letterhead notepad. She wrote a brief directive. "Please handle this with maximum discretion," signed it, and slipped the entire package into a folder. "Have this delivered to our legal department immediately." That evening in their Manhattan apartment, a penthouse she had purchased outright the previous year, Alicia sat down with the triplets. The city lights twinkled behind them through the wall of windows, a glittering backdrop to a conversation 15 years in the making. "Your biological father has filed for visitation rights," she explained, her tone neutral. I want you to know that I've instructed our lawyers that this decision belongs entirely to you. You're old enough to determine what relationship, if any, you want with him." The girls exchanged their characteristic glances, that silent communication that had always fascinated Alicia. "Why now?" Ava asked, ever pragmatic. "He's had 15 years to reach out." "His company is failing," Maya observed. "His social standing is compromised. His marriage appears to be ending. The timing suggests desperation rather than genuine paternal interest." Zoe, always the most emotionally intuitive, considered her sister's points. People sometimes need to lose everything before they can see what should have been valuable to them all along. For 3 days, the triplets discussed the petition among themselves. Alicia observed from a distance, offering input only when asked, determined that their response would be truly theirs. She found them one evening in their shared study space, drafting a letter together. "We've made our decision," Ava announced, handing Alicia the carefully composed response. The letter was remarkably measured for 15-year-olds, neither vindictive nor naively forgiving. "We are not interested in establishing a relationship at this time. Perhaps in the future, when we have fully processed the impact of your choices. For now, we respectfully request distance." "Are you certain this represents how all 3 of you feel?" Alicia asked, studying their faces. Maya nodded. "We've analyzed this from every angle. Emotional, practical, and even genetic. This is our unanimous conclusion." "He doesn't know us," Zoe added quietly. "He wants the idea of us, 3 accomplished Blackwood heirs to salvage his legacy. But we're Johnson women. We've always been Johnson women." Alicia embraced them, these extraordinary daughters who had inherited her resilience along with Marcus's determination, though they'd channeled it far more productively than he ever had. While the triplets' letter made its way through legal channels to Marcus, Madison Blackwood's departure became official. Page 6 featured photos of her entering her attorney's office, the caption noting that divorce proceedings had begun amid rumors she'd already been seen with a younger tech entrepreneur. In his significantly downsized Upper West Side apartment, Marcus sat alone with a tumbler of scotch, staring at the wall where contemporary art pieces had once hung, now showing only lighter squares on the paint where they'd been removed and sold to cover legal fees. His phone rarely rang anymore. Former associates had distanced themselves with the instinctive self-preservation of those who recognize a sinking ship. When the courier delivered the triplets' response, Marcus read it multiple times, searching for some opening, some hint of possibility. Finding none, he dropped the letter onto his cluttered coffee table and buried his face in his hands. 4 weeks later, the technology world buzzed with anticipation of Onyx Innovations' mysterious announcement. Speculation ran rampant. Was it the rumored quantum computing breakthrough? The neural interface that had been glimpsed in patent filings? The revolutionary energy storage solution that industry insiders had whispered about? The Grand Hyatt's largest ballroom was filled beyond capacity. Tech journalists from every major publication jostled for position near the stage. CEOs of Fortune 500 companies sat in reserved front rows. The live stream had already broken viewing records before the presentation even began. Behind the stage, Alicia and the triplets prepared for their entrance. Each wore a variation of the same power suit in different complementary colors. Alicia in deep charcoal, Ava in navy, Zoe in forest green, and Maya in burgundy. "Nervous?" Alicia asked, noting Maya adjusting her collar for the 3rd time. "Not nervous," Maya replied, "just aware of the historical significance. This technology will change everything." Zoe smiled. 300,000 people watching the live stream already. We haven't even started. "The math is solid," Ava affirmed, always focused on the technical fundamentals. "The demonstration will be flawless." As they took the stage to thunderous applause, cameras captured their entrance for audiences worldwide. The image was striking. 4 women of different generations but identical determination, standing before the Onyx logo, ready to change the world. "Today, we introduce Helios," Alicia began, her voice strong and clear. a revolutionary approach to clean energy generation and storage that will make sustainable power accessible to every community on Earth, regardless of economic status or geographic location. The presentation unfolded with precision as each of the triplets took turns explaining different aspects of the technology. Ava covered the mathematical innovations, using holographic displays to illustrate complex concepts in accessible ways. Zoe focused on the global implementation strategy and social impact. Maya explained the scientific breakthroughs that made the technology possible. The audience sat transfixed as these 15-year-old girls articulated concepts that left veteran engineers stunned. When they demonstrated the working prototype, a device the size of a microwave that powered the entire presentation system using only ambient room temperature, the crowd erupted in astonished applause. In his apartment, Marcus watched the live stream on his laptop, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him. On his coffee table lay the final bankruptcy papers for Blackwood Investments, awaiting his signature. The company his grandfather had founded, that his father had built into an empire, and that he had been entrusted to steward, would cease to exist by week's end. On screen, Alicia stood with their daughters, 3 young women who carried his DNA but who had become extraordinary without his influence or contribution. As they answered complex technical questions with confident ease, Marcus felt a peculiar mixture of pride and devastating loss. These remarkable humans had grown from the life he had so callously discarded. And in conclusion, Alicia was saying on screen, Onyx Innovations will be making this technology available through an open licensing model to developing nations. Clean energy shouldn't be a luxury. It should be a fundamental right. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. When the broadcast ended, Marcus sat motionless in the darkened room, the blue light of the screen fading to black. With shaking hands, he reached for the bankruptcy papers and signed his name, the final chapter of the Blackwood legacy closing not with triumph, but with whimpered surrender. That same evening, Alicia sat on the balcony of their Manhattan apartment, watching her daughters excitedly discuss the presentation's success and the flood of partnership offers already coming in. 15 years ago, she had sat on a bare mattress in a basement apartment, pregnant and abandoned, making a silent promise to 3 unborn children. Opening a small wooden box she kept with her personal items, Alicia removed a faded photograph, 3 tiny babies in hospital incubators, so fragile yet so determined to survive. Beside it was the blue plastic hospital bracelet each had worn, preserved as a reminder of where they had begun. Their journey had never been about revenge. It hadn't even been about proving Marcus wrong, though that had certainly occurred in the most public way possible. It had been about discovering their own value, a value that had always existed, regardless of his ability to recognize it. The triplets joined her on the balcony, their animated conversation pausing as they noticed the photograph in her hand. "We were so tiny," Zoe observed, sitting beside her mother. "But surprisingly strong," Alicia replied. "Just like now." Ava studied the New York skyline thoughtfully. "His company is officially declaring bankruptcy tomorrow. It was in the financial news alerts." "Does that make you feel anything?" Alicia asked gently. Maya considered the question with her characteristic thoroughness. "It's not satisfaction exactly, more like confirmation that actions have consequences. The data shows his decline began with poor decisions long after we were born. It was never about proving something to him," Alicia said, echoing her own thoughts. "It was about discovering our own worth." As twilight settled over Manhattan, the 4 Johnson women remained on the balcony, their conversation turning to future plans: Ava's upcoming MIT research fellowship, Zoe's expanded educational initiative in Southeast Asia, Maya's collaboration with CERN. The empire that Marcus had feared would be tarnished by a girl from the Bronx had crumbled by his own hand, while the legacy he rejected flourished beyond any expectation, not through vengeance or retaliation, but through the simple truth that Alicia Johnson had always been exactly what he failed to see: extraordinary. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.